welcome to Crime or Possibly Murder Never Goes Out of Fashion, the 20s, 30s and 40s, the historical panel here at Murderous March with the Mavens of Mayhem. I'm Catriona McPherson, thrilled to be moderating this panel, and I am going to read the bios for our esteemed panelists here in alphabetical order. First, Laurie Chandler in the pink. Laurie Ellie Chandler lives in, loves, writes about, and is presumably joining us today from New York City. Is that where you are, Laurie?
Right.
Yeah. Her Art Deco mystery series celebrates the architecture, the fashion, the nightlife, and the joie de vivre of the city that never sleeps. Book 3, though, The Pearl Dagger. I'm going to try and say pearl with one syllable. Pearl Dagger. Also, though, visits London. Laurie gives talks on her home city and generally makes online friends green with envy by tweeting the view from her Manhattan apartment through the seasons. Or maybe that's just me. Do you know what I loved about this, Laurie, was when she goes to London, she has an extreme reaction to the red post boxes, the pillar boxes, that she thinks look like fire hydrants and why don't dogs pee on them, which never occurred to me. Although the blue boxes, when I came here, wrong, just wrong. Pillar boxes, post boxes are red. Anyway, that's the Pearl Dragon, the Pearl Dagger, sorry. There's Laurie Chandler, and next up we have Erica Ruth Neubauer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yes, ma'am.
Who is gradually getting more fluffy. Erica Ruth started in the military, then she was a civilian cop, then she was a teacher, now she's a mystery novelist, next a cupcake, right? Seriously, Erica Ruth has been an active member of the mystery community for a long while, writing reviews for Publishers Weekly, Mystery Scene, and the Ellie Review of Books. And her Jane Wonderly series, I'll try and get rid of the glare, there we go, is just about to be 3 books long. This is book 2. It's just about to be 3 books long when Danger on the Atlantic joins this one, Death at Wedgfield Hall, and Murder at the Mina House. Now, Danger on the Atlantic.
Yes.
Jane Wonderly, your heroine, is going undercover as Redver's wife.
Yes.
And it just made me think, who watched that Christmas movie, Single All the Way, where 2 friends who weren't a couple were sick of getting a hard time for being single and decided to be a couple at Christmas, you know, in a Lifetime style movie. I just so want Jane undercover as Redver's wife to go down that rom-com route. But you're the boss, technically you're the boss. Anyway, so this is Murder at Wedgfield Manor. Next up alphabetically, we have Kelly Oliver. Kelly is a distinguished professor of philosophy at Vanderbilt University, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, for people who don't know. With lots and lots of published academic work on a wide range of topics, and some crime fiction, I think it's safe to say, Kelly, that channels your philosophical scholarship, so explorations of trafficking and corruption and some other quite hard-hitting subjects. And then there's 12-year-old Cassie O'Rourke, pet detective, in a series for children, and the Fiona Figg mysteries. This is an advanced copy, thank you. So it's got a ribbon across the middle of it. So it's sheer enjoyment for adults, these Fiona Figg historical mysteries, in which Fiona takes her mind off her boy trouble by volunteering for war work as a spy. And Kelly, you know, there's a lot to love. What I love most is that she's got an arch nemesis. I don't think there are enough arch nemesis in contemporary written crime fiction. So kudos for that. And welcome to the panel. And finally, but only in alphabetical order, finally, we have Laurie Rader-Day, our other Laurie, in Chicago, Illinois. Former SYNC president, MWA regional board member, co-chair of the Midwest Mystery Conference, and Toastmaster at this year's VoucherCon in Minneapolis. Laurie is usually, or at least was heretofore, a writer of contemporary mysteries set in America, but she's also a massive fan, defender, and champion of Agatha Christie, and it was a chance remark in a Christie biography that led Laurie to embark on a historical novel set in the Great Dane's country house. So this is Death at Greenway during World War II. Meticulously researched, or at least very cleverly made up, it fooled me, and rapturously received. Greenway seems like a standalone story, but is surely not the last time Laurie is going to go back into the past. I've done this before with Jessie Lowry, who thought she'd stopped the Murder of the Month books at 10 and just whined and scratched at the door until she wrote 2 more. So I just decided to do it again and say, this is not the last time Laurie's going to write historical fiction. There's going to be more, right, Laurie?
We'll see.
Channeling my mum there with a we'll see. Okay. Welcome all and thank you for those books. It was such a treat to read them working for this panel. Okay, so let's start. Anyone at all, but especially Laurie Rader-Day, because some of this, because you've only just started on your long career that you're going to be doing, writing historical novels for us, who love Death at Greenway. Not every question is going to fit for you, so you definitely grab this one. The best and worst thing about writing historicals. You know, if there was a task rabbit that you could offload some of it onto, what would you get rid of and what do you love?
Since I wasn't invited to jump in, I guess I will. I would say research. I did not love research going into this assignment. I have been research averse, actually. So I didn't want to do it, but I knew I had to do it, and I dedicated myself to doing it, and sort of took it very seriously in a way that many people tried to give me sort of a pass. You know, I would talk about trying to get something very specifically right, and they're like, why don't you just make that up, just make it the way you want it to be. That I had decided that I wanted to use whatever history I could find, and then when I ran out of history, I would make it up. But I just kept finding more and more and more history. I kept doing more and more and more research, which I did not want to do. But I ended up liking it. I mean,
the research you did wasn't a chore. I mean, come on.
Oh, we're going there immediately?
Yeah.
Okay. So the best part was also research, because I was able to go to Greenway, Agatha Christie's beloved holiday home in Devon, England, twice. Once just to see if the story could even be told, to figure out, like, you know, I was basically a tourist and just kind of like scratching the surface just a little bit to see if the story was there. And then 3 years later, I was able to go back, this time with a list and a plan and an agenda. And I got to stay at Greenway. So this is the eyebrow raise that Catriona is giving. Oh, the research is so difficult, Laura. You had to stay at Agatha Christie's house. Poor you. But that part was delightful. The staying 3 nights at Agatha Christie at Greenway, and just being there in a way that nobody else. You can actually rent out apartments in the top floor, and there were people in those apartments when we were there, but they were, I don't know what they were doing. They were just enjoying the area and using Greenway as their hotel. They did not hang out, as far as I could tell, on the grounds at all, but we just lived there for 4 days, and it was amazing. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity. So research and then research.
Well, you know, if they were writing a book, you beat them to it, so who cares, right?
I mean, I totally got there first. Yeah.
How about anyone else? Best and worst bit about writing historical fiction? Kelly.
I love the research because, you know, I'm a professor, and so I'm used to doing research, and so that felt very familiar to me, although history is not really my thing. But one thing that I really like about writing historicals is that since you can rely on history, a lot of the plot is there. Like, you can find plot and all of these surprises in history, and I mean, learning lots of new things and funny little tidbits to throw in. But as a writer, I find it makes it easier, because I guess maybe I have trouble sometimes with the plot, that a lot of the stories of these characters are already great plots. So it's kind of like a cheat sheet, you know, that I can read the history and have this plot already made. So that I like a lot. I mean, the thing I guess I don't like is that I am bound to make mistakes. I mean, I'm bound to make mistakes anyway, like make a lot of mistakes, but at least when I'm making everything up, nobody will know. Yeah, you know, it's just inevitable that I'm going to use a wrong word. I mean, I try, I really do, but, you know, use a word that wasn't used in 1917, which is when my books are set, or use a word that British person wouldn't use since my protagonist is British, use like an American word. So I try not to do that, but I'm sure it happens.
And you'll always find out, because there's always a kind person who's going to get in touch and tell you, right?
Yes.
You know, when this book first came out, one of the first reviews, I was like, what? Was really hammering me about Charlie Chaplin and the Little Tramp, because there's a mention of Little Tramp and how that wasn't until 1920. I'm like, there's no way I could have got something like that wrong. Because I also work in film in my other life as a scholar. I was like, that seems unlikely. So I went back and I was right, but what can you do? It's already out there in the review, and you're like, oh. So
you can wallow in your triumph, and they can sit there in the wrongness and be wrong. Right?
the reviews out there too. So, yeah. But now I got to say that publicly, so I feel a lot better.
Yeah, that would have hurt. Yeah, that would have hurt.
Yeah, I love the inspiration history gives me, and these weird little things that pop up. Like there's a prosecutor from New York that lives in my apartment building, and we got to talking, and he told me about Eunice Carter, who is going to make an appearance in another novel coming up, who's the first Black woman prosecutor in New York, and she helped take down one of the biggest gangsters ever, and it was something spectacular, not just tax evasion. And there's a plaque of her like in the Law House in New York City. So I mean, he and I are geeking out about all this stuff, and I'm like, she's got to go in my next book, because I always love having cameos, and she's gonna play a big role. But I also feel, though, what Lori was saying, in that I'm doing the opposite. I started in history, but I've got a work in progress that's contemporary. And there's so much freedom. I'm like, oh my gosh, these two can high five. I don't have to look if the high five started in the 30s or not, and like what's acceptable, and is a thumbs up acceptable? Maybe the okay sign, you know. So there's all this freedom. They have phones. They've got this. They've got that. So I do like that, but I do.
Oh yeah, but they've got phones.
Phones is a problem.
And I do the opposite, though, just like Kelly was saying. I was like, I love how when you kind of get stuck sometimes, though, and in the writing process, you always kind of hit these little funny walls. And with history, you can start flipping through some articles or something else, and it inspires you to take it maybe this route, and you wouldn't have thought of that. And I found that a little trickier in a modern day piece. So
because there's too much, because there's not enough, or because there's too much, because it's not obvious where to look.
Well, I think it's just another resource, you know? So like when it's a history one and I hit a wall, I can just start looking at different things and get inspired. And it's just another resource to get past that obstacle. And then I find I don't have that, you know, in modern day one. I got to look for other kinds of resources to help get that. But it is really nice to have the freedom to not have to worry about which expression, which dress shape, and which heel shape is in fashion, and you know, all those things are fun, but it can be tedious too. So yeah,
I agree with you, Lori, that those are some of the things I both love and hate. I think it's fun. I love reading like about all the history stuff and getting inspired, but like it's the little nitty gritty details where I can't find it, can't figure out exactly when that started. But I also love the research, because I set myself up that I get to go somewhere fabulous for each book. So, because each of my books is set in a different location, so I get to travel with mine. So that's the part of the research that I love to do.
Tax deductible tourism.
Exactly.
Not to love, right? So, maybe you've answered. No, I don't think I have answered this. If someone was to ask, and I am, why do you write historicals? I mean, you can have a highfalutin reason and a true reason. I know I do. How did you get into it, or what is it about writing historicals, given that there is so much research and you get letters when you got something wrong and you don't know if they can use the okay sign? Why do you do it?
I mean, for me, I love reading historicals. I like escaping into the past. And I actually kind of enjoy the strictures of writing in a time when they didn't have cell phones and they didn't have easy access to necessarily fingerprint technology or that kind of stuff. I think it makes it trickier, and I like having to work within those boundaries. But yeah, one of the reasons I write it is because I love to read it so much.
Yeah, I'm a fan of historical mysteries too, so that seemed natural. But also I find, having first started writing contemporary suspense and then moving to historical, that actually I can shine a light on some issues that are close to my heart, contemporary social issues, like women's issues mostly, but women's issues in a way in the historical that I can't do as well. I think, well, it's different, that just give a different perspective than in the contemporaries. So because sexism was so restrictive and so obvious to us now. I mean, looking back, we can see things about the past that people who lived in it couldn't see, and we can't see about our present. So you can kind of shine a light on some of those things in a way that hopefully makes readers think about their contemporary present experience. And so I like writing that kind of tension, that kind of friction of a woman in the early 20th century, and the kinds of restrictions for women then, and just thinking about that in relationship to our own experience now. I think that
really good point.
show, and also it's fun to write a kind of proto-feminist character that would never see herself as feminist, but we could see her as having those kinds of sensibilities, even against her own, I guess, better judgment, something like that.
Well, self-preservation sometimes, it's kind of nail biting sometimes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think I grew up reading them too. I love historicals, but I think the reason is we learn history in pockets, and we don't always realize whose lives and events are all coming in at the same time. And I love doing that. That's why I have a lot of cameos and things that I'm a sucker for, lost stories or lost points of history that kind of get overwritten, like the women, like Kelly was saying, or things like, I have the Hindenburg in one of my books because it was tooling around, across the Atlantic all the time, like for years. And it was just a part of the landscape. You'd see it around Manhattan all the time. And really everybody only thinks of the crash. So things like that, I love to pull out things that maybe you wouldn't realize. And the cameos are great too, because they help you realize, oh yeah, that was happening too. Like when Lane goes to London, Winston Churchill's there and he's not in a position of power yet. He always thinks he's in the wilderness, but she could see his power already, or running into C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and like, who are the people that would be in these circles? It's fun pulling those in, because I think you don't tend to think of history that way. I think when we are learning a topic, you learn a really specific topic, not what it was like to live there. And that's my favorite thing about reading and writing it, is what was it like to be there, and how can I help people get a better feel for time and place? It's really fun.
That's such a good point, because you hear, when you say the word Hindenburg, it's really hard not to say disaster after it, and her meeting young and scrappy Winston Churchill, or him being there, just divine, because you've got one picture of Winston Churchill. I mean, going back to something that Kelly just said about her proto-feminist, so you either think people are people and they always were, and people are people everywhere, or the past is another country and they do things differently there. Do you, and Erica Ruth, especially thinking about Jane Wonderly's sort of incredible to us lack of independence, even as a woman at her stage in life, and her, how much she has to kind of go along with what her aunt wants her to do and says and has got to say about her, and her interference in her life. How do you, all of you, how have you navigated that? They're still people, and we want to use them to shine a light on now, but they're of their time as well. What do you do about this? Sorry about this, such a rambling question, but I hope you can pluck one out of it. Anyone?
I guess for me, I try to skirt the line. Like I try to have her push against it as much as I think she could probably get away with for the time period. But it was a different time, and it was a difficult time for women. And even though there were changes that were happening right after World War I, it still was difficult. I mean, women were just starting to come into the workforce, which all changed after World War II, but women were starting to come into the workforce and starting to have, jobs outside the home. But it still was a very restricted society for them.
So do you try to write, I mean, I know the answer because I've read your books, but do you try to write from here looking back to there, or do you try to write as though you are there? Or is that not how you think about it?
I see it as a movie playing in my head when I'm writing it. So I don't know how to answer that question for you.
Oh, okay.
I think I might be.
I know what I think.
I think I might be there.
Yeah, I think you're there. Because you don't judge these. I mean, it's really annoying to see the influence of her aunt on her life. This is a grown woman. It's infuriating. But yeah, there's no winking to the audience about it. Yeah. What does anyone else think about that? Were people the same, or do you have to really get into a different mindset to get back there? Or look at your faces. This is just a terrible question, and let's move on.
It's a hard question.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, one of the things of Tina, you're so funny. Look at their faces. But I think it's both, because what's interesting for me about the 30s is the women were more in the city too. So that where they are, where people are, and the timing makes a big difference on how much they were allowed. Like women in New York had a lot more freedom and a lot bigger jobs even than like where my aunts grew up at the same era in Michigan. And I was trying to show that I feel like the women of the 30s are much more worldly than you ever would have expected in the city. And then it wasn't really till after World War II that they really got stamped down as far as their power and their independence and whatnot. And I really wanted to show that because I feel like women especially city women who had really good jobs, some really big influencers were around, photographers, doctors, all sorts of stuff. That's again the stuff that I wanted to pull out because I find it fascinating that they had more power in the 30s and then 2 decades later all taken away. So it's a little bit of both. Like I like to figure out what is similar, what is very different. Where would they? So Lane gets a lot of like the fanny pats and things like that my mother did too, even in the workplace until she of course has to put people in their place. But and that's fun coming up with too, like how is she gonna put these men in their place? I think it's both. And I think you have to really be careful with the kind of book you're writing too. Is it a serious one? Is it something or is it playful? Where can you stretch the boundaries of the storyline and making the character what you want it to be versus the history's constructs? I think it's both. And I think you have to be really smart about it so that it comes off well and not contrived.
Yeah, what she said.
Or you could be really dumb about it and just stumble your way through and not know how to answer this question because you don't remember how.
Okay. Well, here's a different question. I just want to make you talk about your characters. So here's a different question. What makes a character into a favorite character for you? You could just troll me so badly by just going, no matter what I say now. That would be really funny.
I want to try.
Laurie?
Go ahead, Laurie.
No, go ahead.
Laurie?
Laurie or Lowry?
Yeah.
No, I was gonna troll you because I want to know about your highfalutin reason versus your real reason later, Catriona, for writing historicals. You gestured toward your answer, but then you didn't give it to us. So that's what I want.
The real reason is I don't need to know anything. It would be boring to find out. I don't need any forensics, and nobody's got a phone, so everybody can be in trouble. You don't just call someone. It's easier, and also semi-serious and also very handy reason is that shame and the working of shame, especially if you write about women's lives, sexual shame makes high stakes where there would not be high stakes now. So, you know, it means that you can, you know, like with Mansfield Park, the amateur theatricals, oh my God, you know, that kind of thing. It just, some stakes were higher, some were lower.
Yeah, it also, your question makes me think that one thing I like about writing, you know, if I write the Fiona character in 1917, is it makes me trying to imagine being in that place, and being her makes me also not take for granted a lot of the freedoms, I guess you could call them, that we do have. So trying to imagine what would it be like to be a woman facing the situation, what would be allowed, what wouldn't be allowed. Like you were saying, what would she feel embarrassed about or ashamed of that maybe we might take for granted? So
yeah,
I like that kind of exercise too.
Well, Lane and Laurie Chandler's the Freedom 2, she has some nightlife, doesn't it? I mean, it's, you know, Carrie Bradshaw wants that nightlife, but Freedom From, she doesn't have, like you were saying about the getting patted on her bottom.
Right, exactly.
No, nobody misses that.
Yeah. And your question about is why do we like our own main character, or what do we like about any good main character? Is it,
well, your characters, doesn't have to be your main character. I don't know if you've had characters that you thought were going to be tiny and then they're just great and so they grow.
It is fun to see them develop too. And I always say my non-writing friends, I have a couple of friends who aren't even really readers. And so when I talk about things like letting the characters grow and then they do something that surprises me, they're always like, what? You are writing it. I'm like, I know, but she surprised me. So it happens. So
Does that happen for everyone, yeah?
Yeah, and I think it's great. I think I like it when characters are complicated. I like it when a book has a really wide variety of characters. Like even my villains, I love villains you just love to hate, and I love villains that they've got, I don't know, like a soft spot or something else that you're like, it's so you love to hate them, but then also you kind of like them too. I think I like to make characters and read characters that have depth to them. And then also, you know, are growing too. I think growing and changing, you know, and some don't, you know, some because they're just meant to be, you know, background or whatever. But I like having a variety. And I really like, I like that Fiorello LaGuardia is exactly who he really was. I don't have to make up anything with him. He's so funny. And I will get letters about like, oh, that couldn't have happened. And I'm like, no, he literally did do that. Like here's the article, you know, like funny things that he did or sensational like PR stunts that he did. That's fun too, you know, getting to
you haven't dialed him up much at all then.
No.
Because I mean, I wanted to talk to Laurie Rader-Day and Laurie Chandler about, because you've got Fiorello LaGuardia on the page, and Laurie Rader-Day, you've got Agatha Christie on the page. But Agatha Christie is a very shadowy figure in Death at Greenway, and LaGuardia is just bang, there he is. You know, he bursts onto the page. So what, you know, compare and contrast, what made you decide to do those two very different things? Did you, sorry, Laurie Rader-Day, were you tempted to keep adding Agatha Christie to have her?
I mean, I did. What I was tempted to do was to leave her out entirely because, I mean, she's so beloved. She's, you know, such a, you know, a figure in the lives of all my friends who write mysteries. And she was not at that house during the war. Famously, she went to London and picked up her knowledge about poisons again and medicine, and was basically a pharmacist assistant in London to be near her husband who was doing war work. So I, you know, knowing that, I did not expect her to be at Greenway. She rented the house to this group of 10 children being evacuated and their chaperones and the 2 nurses. And then she skedaddled to London. So I didn't expect her to be there. And in a way, I didn't really want to have her in the book in that way. I didn't want to have to like put on her skin and be the Agatha Christie character. that was just a little like a step too far for me. However, then in my research, I found that she and her husband and a friend were at Greenway in the kitchen listening to the wireless when war was announced. And she wrote about that moment and her husband wrote about that moment. And so I had this sort of triangulation of what people were thinking and what was happening and what was happening in the room. And I thought maybe I could attempt it. By that point, I thought maybe I can try, because I've read all these books about her. I've read her autobiography a couple of times, and I thought maybe I could attempt it. But then once I had that one scene, my agent and then my editor were like, "Ooh, we want more Agatha." And I'm like, she wasn't there. So I did work her in, because then I found, again, through research, that she tried to sell Greenway during World War II. So she actually did come back a couple of times to show the house to people, for instance. And so that opened up the door to, okay, now I can show her doing that. But what I really wanted was to have her presence be felt by everybody in the house, and to sort of watch what they did with that, instead of having her there being Agatha. I think she probably would have been a big force in the house. It's not a huge house. It's not Downton Abbey. It's a very reasonably sized house. And so I don't think that she could have been there and not been in almost every scene, basically.
Which takes us.
That makes total sense. You did a good job with that, because I would worry the difference is you have Agatha is such a beloved, well-known character. And I think any of us that do a beloved, well-known character, it's like Lincoln. What's the saying that you can't write about Lincoln and guns, and you have to worry about every little single tiny thing. It's like that. She's like that. LaGuardia is not that well known. I mean, his name is known and New Yorkers know him, but some of who he was, what he did, his antics, like nobody really knows about that. So I didn't have those same kinds of limitations either, as you do with like a Churchill kind of character or something like that, where I think it would be really easy if for you that Agatha could take over everything. And that's not really the story you were writing, where mine was different. And then even how I thought I read an article about him right when we moved here. We moved here right after 9/11. And there was some huge similarities to New York during the aftermath of 9/11 and the 30s, and this beauty out of adversity that's like a major theme in pretty much everything I write. And I was like, gosh, I had no idea LaGuardia was like this, and that art was so important to him. And as far as how I characterized him, there's no way he could ever be a shadowy character in anything he ever does. Like, he was that bombastic. And, you know, yesterday in speed dating, I even said, to this day, I can't find an article on him where the journalists either don't give him a storm superlative, you know, he came in like a tornado, he came in like a, you know, or they can't keep up with him. And so, so he had to be, if he was going to be in it, he had to be that big and funny, you know, otherwise that wouldn't have been true either. So
my Fiona Fig, if I could just jump in, was actually what inspired me was the villain, Frederick Fredericks, who is a continuing villain. And he is based on a real life spy whose name was Fritz Duquesne, who used also the alias Frederick Fredericks along with a lot of other aliases. But his story, I mean, his story sounds like fiction. It's just insane. And he was a spy for the Germans in World War I and World War II, and things that you wouldn't think could possibly be true that are kind of funny. Like he, in the second Fiona Fig, in High Treason at the Grand Hotel, it's set in Paris, and it has Mata Hari and, you know, other historical characters. But there's a scene where Frederick Fredericks is imprisoned, and he then, oh, spoiler alert, anybody out there, but anyway, he pretends like his legs are paralyzed, and they prick him with pins to make sure, and you know, he passes all the pin tests, and then he ends up escaping because his legs are not paralyzed, and he, you know, puts on a woman's clothing to escape. That, I mean, not the way I tell it in the Paris prison, but that's based on a true story where he actually for 2 years pretended that his legs were paralyzed, and they actually did, you know, test to make sure by poking with pins and doing all kinds of tests. And then he did escape finally, you know, when he saw his moment after pretending that his legs were paralyzed for 2 years. But anyway, he is such a great character because he's a great character in real life. So when I run out of fun plot twists or turns, I just have to look back at some of the biographies of this guy. So, but he's someone that probably no one has ever heard of. But it's so much fun that to find out about this character. He seemed to be so successful as a spy just based on his personality. He had so much charisma. I mean, he went hunting with Roosevelt, and he pretended to be a journalist at I think it was the New York Post, or anyway, some New York newspaper. Now I don't remember which one. I mean, he had all of these successful kind of careers, but all the time he was a spy. But people, because he wasn't like hiding in the shadows. He was just totally out there, being this kind of crazy, charismatic person that could convince. He seems like the kind of person that could convince anybody that he was anything. So it's just fun to read about him.
I want to ask Erica Ruth about the Golden Age, but I'm going to slide into it by pulling a question out of the chat here. Carol in the chat has just asked you, Kelly, was Fiona, sorry, my brain went completely blank there because I'm thinking about all your different character names. Was Fiona Figg inspired by Miss Lemon?
Yes, Fiona Figg, yes, was inspired by Miss Lemon. And
say who Miss Lemon is in case anyone doesn't know.
Miss Lemon is an Agatha Christie character in the Poirot series. So probably a lot of people are familiar with Miss Lemon, although she's a pretty minor character. She plays a much bigger role in the BBC
the
production.
Crazy bang.
Yeah, with the little red curly cues, right? So yeah, it began to. Thanks for that question, Carol, because in addition to the bad guy, Fritz Duquesne, it was inspired by Miss Lemon, thinking about what would the Poirot stories be like if it wasn't Poirot, but Miss Lemon, who was the detective character or the protagonist character. Yeah, and there's more to say about that, but I'll stop for now.
I might come back and press you harder on that, but thinking about the Golden Age, Erica Ruth, am I right in thinking that you are purposefully hitting Golden Age hotspots with your settings? Yeah?
Oh,
Yeah.
of course. Those are the fun places to write about.
Yeah, I mean, because Egypt, I've said this so many times before, but you just saying, I'm going to write a murder mystery set in Egypt in the 20s. Who's going to stop me? And
Nobody.
everybody thought, oh, wow, we didn't know you were allowed to do that. That's clever. Well done. So Egypt, country house in England, Atlantic steamship.
Yes. Istanbul. I'm going next week, actually. I will be in Istanbul next week.
Oh, okay.
Poor thing. That's rough. Really rough.
The Laurie Rader-Day, dig deep and keep trying to do your research. So was that the impetus for Jane Wonderly for the series?
It was. I really wanted to set something for the first one. I definitely wanted to set something in Egypt in the 20s. That was exactly what I wanted to do. But I knew that I didn't want to do like a Barbara Peters situation. Not Barbara Peters, Elizabeth Peters. Didn't want to do an Elizabeth Peters. Yeah, I know, right? Elizabeth Peters situation, because Amelia Peabody was such a fantastic character. I did not think that I could do that any kind of justice. And so I decided, I mean, I love to travel just personally. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if I just set myself up for a lot of extra work and had each book move to a different place that were the fun hotspots in the 1920s. And that's what I'm doing.
Laura Island? Soldier Island? I mean, that's a nice hotel. Right? Who wouldn't want to? Do you know what I mean? That the Burra Island, that Soldier Island in
I
And Then
do.
They Were None and Evil Under the Sun. So it's a coastal, it's a coastal island where the hotel is that they were in Evil Under the Sun, and it's also fictionalized in And Then They Were None, and it's still there, and it's got a big Art Deco hotel.
Where is it?
South of England, off Devon.
Oh, okay. So like
Burra Island.
Yeah.
Very, very close to Devon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very. Very beautiful. Great pedigree in historical mystery fiction. And really expensive, so I believe.
Making
But it's not all, I mean, it's not all glamour. I am going to talk about tea because, you know, it's no, let's talk about drinks. There's drinks. It's like everybody's floating away in drinks. It's cocktails for Laurie Chandler, pretty much. Although there's tea in this one because they go to London. And there's beer in the pub for Laurie Rader-Day because it's the English countryside. I loved in Murder, is it Murder or Death? Murder at Wedgfield Manor, Erica Ruth, that Jane manages to get the servants to make her a pot of coffee at tea time because she's American, and it's disgusting, but you know, they're trying. And then of course there's Fiona Figg and her deep ancestral need for decent tea, which you have a lot of fun with Kelly, especially when she's on the continent and she can't get a decent cup of tea anywhere. And I just wondered, has anyone, you know, in your American audience said that you're overdoing this? Because to me, you almost approach the amount of tea drunk by British people and the seriousness with which British people take tea. Because I have to take references to tea and kettle out of my books all the time because there's just too many. But how did you manage to pitch that just right?
Oh, well, thank you. If it is just right. I am an avid tea drinker and a bit, I guess you could say a connoisseur or maybe a snob but I mostly drink green tea, but I've got a cupboard that is so stacked that if you open it, the tea starts falling out and I've got to keep stuffing it back in of all different kinds of tea. So that is, I guess, right what you know, that I have that experience pretty much when I go anywhere. I can't get a cup of tea that I really like unless I bring my own tea along and hope that the water hasn't been in a coffee pot. Have you been at conferences and conventions where if you're a tea drinker, this is like your worst nightmare, where you get the water out of those big containers with the spigot, and they've had coffee in there before, or they serve you, they bring you the pot of water at breakfast and there's been coffee in there anytime in the past. Anyway, everyone's looking like, huh? But if
I'm with you. I'm with you all the way. I once had a pot of coffee that was made with tea. Someone used tea to make coffee instead of water. That is not good.
Yeah, that also reminds me, thinking of the horrible stale coffee flavor ruining my tea, that one little tidbit that I learned actually recently was that in April of 1917, the British government declared tea a weapon of war so that it wouldn't have to be rationed in the same way that it had been, and that it was, in a sense, a weapon of war because it kept the troops going. Because they would bring their water in containers that were used for fuel. So to disguise the fuel taste, they used tea instead of just bringing water. So they didn't drink water. They drank tea. And I kind of feel like that when I'm drinking that watery tea that has had coffee.
Yeah, a little bit of
gasoline.
Yeah.
To me, but yeah.
Laurie Chandler, is there a signature cocktail for the Pearl Dagger?
Yes, she does. Her favorite is a bad romance, which if you Google that, you're going to come across a very unfortunate one that's actually by Lady Gaga that sounds awful. Hers is if you follow me on social media, I'll put it out there today, but it's a combination of it was at a speakeasy I went to in New York that they made this signature cocktail for it, and so she has that, and it's got cranberry juice, champagne, I think there's even tequila in it, and like lime juice. And so it's kind of lighter, and a lot of the cocktails then were very fizzy, like a lot of light flavors and that kind of thing. But then my signature cocktails is whiskey sour, because I'm always drinking that, and I have that recipe in there too. But yeah, I got a lot of a real one, of course, is like a sidecar. And I got all my recipes from different speakeasies here, which also was really a hardship for research to have to go to the speakeasies and do that. But I marched on. So
Huh.
Mhm.
So Erica, Ruth, and Kelly and Laurie Chandler, be aware that we don't want to put Laurie Rader-Day off writing more historical fiction. Okay, the job here is to make sure that she writes more. Is it getting easier or harder as you go through a series of historical novels? Everybody's moaning about tea now.
I'm gonna say it's getting harder for. I will say that the reason I have so much coffee in my books is because I'm really serious about coffee, the way you guys are about tea. Like I'm really serious about it. That's why Jane's so serious about it. But I would say it's getting easier, except for book 4, which is what I'm working on right now, because for this one, it's been very difficult to find a lot of information about Istanbul in the 20s. The other books I had a much easier time finding good resources. And this one, I'm even struggling to find pictures of what the city looked like. I can find a couple here and there, but not the way that I was able to for the other settings. So this one is a little bit more difficult for that reason.
I wasn't even thinking of that, but of having a different setting every time. I was thinking, for me anyway, it's more and more, so you don't have to find it out, but then you've got to find something fresh to say about it in each book. So how's that going for you, Kelly, and you, Laurie Chandler?
I'm finding it easier, I guess, because I think, but for the most part, because I feel like I know the character better, so I have a better sense of inhabiting her, and knowing also in the series I have several continuing characters, so that helps, that I feel like I know what they would say, and that makes it a little bit easier. And also Fiona travels to different locations, so far for me it also, like Erica, Ruth, has been about learning a new location, or it always has required new kind of research, and there are also new characters coming in, new historical characters, so the kind of secondary historical characters are always different, and so that gives me a lot also to learn. But then again, I haven't written nearly as many books as you have, so I can't even imagine by the time I got to
me. Yeah.
Yes. I can see that for you it might be a very different experience, because you've written so many wonderful historical.
Well, I sent her to different places though. She's in she's in the same time, but she's in a different milieu each time. So a magazine and a magazine publisher, or a convent, or a circus, or whatever. So I cheat. But how about you, Laurie Chandler?
It hasn't, in the sense of I have a lot of ideas because of so many of the resources I have, and I do base a lot on the real crimes that were there, and there's always these tantalizing tidbits of like things that you hear about, and then you're like, why don't they tell us the rest of the story? And so I can make that part up, and I give lots of ideas for inspiration. However, I think it can get tedious though, and I think for me, I like variety, and that's why over the last couple of years I've been working on a couple standalones that are completely different genres, completely different things, but that's just for my own writing benefit out of having that variety. And then I've noticed when I do go back into writing Art Deco, I'm more excited. I think it's kind of, I get more replenished that way by reading and writing a lot of different kinds of things. But as far as coming up with ideas, one thing I did intentionally do though is I didn't want to have to go to World War II. And that was a lot of books, and the historicals tend to like especially like Amelia Peabody and stuff, since you mentioned her, like it was like every year, because they had a different mystery every year that they would go to, Egypt. I'm like, I can't do that. It's so close. And I just didn't want it to be a World War II series. So mine, I kept to like seasonally. So each one is like, spring and summer, or fall or winter, that kind of thing. So it kind of slowly does the dates, and I can keep it within the pre-war timing. So even that way, that's one of the things that I was doing. So yeah.
Oh, someone, Kathleen, I said something in the chat that is not the first thing that's not been about tea since I said the word tea. The whole chat box has been about tea ever since.
I love tea.
Yeah, but you're writing about Manhattan. You're not going to run out of things to say about I mean, I've been to New York so many times, and the last 4 or 5 times I've been, we've always said, well, let's try and get to Brooklyn. Never done it, because you never run out of things to do on that island. Right, I am now going to ask the hard question that I said I might ask, and everybody just sobbed and lay on the floor and drummed their heels, and I'm going to ask it anyway. And that is about anachronisms, because that's everyone's big fear, isn't it, when you're writing historical fiction? I mean, you talked about mistakes briefly earlier, Kelly, but the anachronisms are my biggest fear anyway. Have you had any near misses or any late saves that things have slipped through and then you've caught them, or even if things have slipped all the way through? I had Dandy Gilbert go over a bridge in 1938 that wasn't built until 1964, and there it is in the hardback. And I drove over it when I went there to do research, but they made it look old-fashioned. So
I referred to the butler's unibrow in the second book, and apparently,
oh, honey,
I know. Yep.
maybe this is too painful, but we can share. Everybody does it.
Yep.
It is painful. But another thing I find interesting in trying to avoid the anachronism is that some things are not anachronistic, but they sound wrong. So readers will get upset, and you kind of have to avoid it. Like, like Lori Chandler was talking about, do they do thumbs up or okay? And, what could you use the word hang out? But it turns out you could use the word hang out in the 19th century. But if you wrote that in a book set in the 19th century, I bet a lot of readers would be like, no, they didn't say, you want to hang out, or I don't know how they would say it, but things that are not actually.
Yeah, you've got to be seen to be, you've got to be right, you've got to be seen to be right. I've had to take things out, especially bits of Scottish dialect that have been in Scottish dialect since, the Middle Ages. But then they got fashionable and spread into the standard, and so they seem modern. Like Minger, for someone who's not very pretty, is something that we would always have said, but it sounds like the late 90s. So, and that's really annoying. Anybody else?
I see in the chat that Carol was saying that sweet, that they in the 30s they would say sweet, like I guess we do today, but if you wrote that, people might that's
yeah there, I mean,
I haven't had this experience yet, but there was actually, Catriona, you read my book for me early for Britishness, thank you. And you suggested, I had used a word for like a baby making some noises, like being upset. And I called it fussing. And you're like, oh, no, that we wouldn't call it that in England, right? Ever. And you suggested a word, but you suggested grizzle. The baby grizzled. I'm like, what?
That's just a normal word for me, grizzling.
But I'm writing a book that's mostly for American readers that's set in England, and I knew if I dropped the word grizzling for a baby, people would be like, what? So I used it, but I used it in a moment when I could actually describe it instead of just dropping it. So that's just an example of the hardship of historicals, trying to figure out how to use words that are correct.
And a double dose of historical in another country is just, pressure added to pressure. So we are getting close to the end of time, and I wonder if we need to take some questions from people who are here. But I've got one last question. Which historical authors do you read and would you recommend? Who do you enjoy? I mean, we've heard Elizabeth Peters, Agatha Christie. I think we can just say she's a given. She's like salt and pepper on the table.
But she only had one historical, really.
Well, in addition to...
Oh, yes, good point. She was old, not historical.
She's just old, contemporary.
Of course, yeah. Right.
I would say in addition to the people on this panel, especially, I have to say, Catriona, I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and the Dandy Glover series. But someone that I just love and can't wait to see always the next installment coming out is Sujita Massi's Marvin series. That is so fun. I guess I'm also a Reese Bowen fan, especially her standalones. I like those a lot.
Just writing
I'm
that in
also
the
a fan
chat.
of Bandy Gilbert and the new book that Catriona has coming out very soon.
Oh yeah, that's in my basket already.
It is good. I already
He's
read it.
gone from 1938 to 1940 and missed out the thing I don't want to research because I'm lazy. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you a question, Catriona, and that is you've written so many in a series, but you've also written these amazing standalones. And I just wonder, I mean, Lori Rader-Day, also you've written standalones, and but I wonder about the difference between writing series and standalones, or if you have one that you prefer, or I don't know, they just read, they read differently. I enjoy them both, but Catriona, yours do.
Yeah, because you haven't written, you haven't written 2 books about the same. They're all standalones for you, Laurie, right?
Me,
I
yeah,
mean,
they're all standalones.
The good thing is, although while I'm saying this, don't listen, Erica Ruth and Laurie Chandler, think about your favorite historical writers. The good thing is, in a standalone, you can kill everyone, or you could if you weren't a sap. I can't kill anyone because I fall in love with them. And the good thing is, with a series that, you know, you still need a villain and some red herrings and things like that, but you can settle in and you know some of the people, so there's not as much coding that world to do. So there's pros and cons, both ways. Yeah, and to go back and forward, as Laurie Chandler was saying, is just refreshing to your brain to look at something else.
So Lori Rader-Day, sorry to be asking questions, but I'm just so curious why you haven't written series. And
Kelly,
now pressure to, you know, we want another Greenway kind of mystery. So
well, I don't know if there's going to be another Greenway. Death at Greenway nearly killed me, quite literally. So I just love standalones. I think it's my own I don't know, just I don't have a good attention span. And so there's a lot of good TV out there, okay? There are so many things I would rather be doing than writing most days. I enjoy it once I'm going, but there's lots of things keeping me from it all the time. And it started when I was working full time. So I really had to figure out how to get the writing done. And to do that, it needed to be the new shiny idea. So for me, it's really my own limitations, the attention span that will not just finish a book and then turn over and go, what new adventure will this great character have? I don't know how you guys do it book after book. I love series books to read, but I don't know how you guys do it. It's amazing. Karina, you asked a question about who we like to read. Charles Todd. I like Charles Todd, the Rutledge series, and of course, I really like Sarah Waters, her historical.
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I see in the chat Diane Friedman and also Mariah Fredericks, and I like to read them a lot too.
Oh, Richard.
I second those.
Yep, Richard Coreto is a favorite of mine. Yeah, he's just starting to write about grand houses in New York, in the sort of the Belle Epoque. That's the right to call the sort of fantasy echo, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I using the right terms? Yeah, I'm not a historian at all. Yeah. Hank just asked about a huge question, and we've only got 1 minute left, about weaving real events into fiction, but we can stay in the chat after we finish in 1 minute. In the next 1 minute, Erica Ruth or Laurie Chandler, do you have like favorite writers you want to recommend?
Mine were, I put mine in the box, but mine are Diane Freeman and Sarah Rosette are two. I also really enjoy Lindsay Fay.
Oh yeah. See, I don't think of her as a historical author, but yeah, she.
R.J. Coretto has some really good ones that I love, and I love his Alice and the Assassin series about Alice Roosevelt's feisty daughter, and I love Lucinda Riley a lot, Tess Thompson, Mariah Fredericks, Dana Rayburn. I love Veronica Speedwell.
Me too.
She's my best friend. I love
that is a happy note on which to finish. Sorry that we didn't get to the question about weaving fact into fiction. We can stay in the chat. thank you so very much for this. It was lovely to talk to you all. And thanks for thanks for not boycotting my 2 difficult questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Happy
Catriona.
writing.
Thank you,
Go and have a cup of
Catriona.
tea, everyone. Bye.
That's right.
Thank you.
We need a cuppa now.